PseudoPod is made entirely by humans in service of an ancient being wider than time and older than hope. She's nice. Says hello.
PseudoPod, episode 1021, for March 20th, 2026. Bad Doors, by John Wiswell. Narrated by Trendane Sparks. Hosted by Scott Campbell. Audio by Chelsea Davis. Hey everyone, hope you're doing okay. I'm Scott, assistant editor at PseudoPod, your host for this week, and I'm excited to tell you that for this week we have Bad Doors by John Wiswell. Bad Doors was originally published in Uncanny Magazine in 2023. This story was a finalist for the Nebula Award for Best Short Story. John Wiswell is a disabled writer who lives where New York keeps all its trees. His fiction has won both the Nebula Award and the Locust Award. His works have appeared in Tor.com, Uncanny Magazine, the LeVar Burton Reads podcast, the No Sleep podcast, Diabolical Plots, and the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, among other fine venues. And his works have been translated into 8 different languages. It's the third time appearing on PseudoPod, following Under the Rubble in 2017 and The Tentacle and You in 2022. He adores PseudoPod and is so glad to be back. His debut novel, Someone You Can Build a Nest In, was published by Daw Books in spring of 2024, and it follows a shape-shifting monster who makes the mistake of falling in love with the woman who's hunting her. You can find out more about John and his works on his Substack at johnwiswell.substack.com. Your narrator is Trendane Sparks. Originally born in Texas, Trendane Sparks eventually escaped and wound his way through a mystical series of jobs in the San Francisco Bay Area, where he has worked as a software quality assurance tester for both graphic drivers and video games, a freelance mascot performer, and several jobs on a PBS kids show. For most of his life, people have told him that his voice is a pleasure to listen to, but since being a werewolf phone sex operator can get boring, he decided to use his powers to entertain a broader audience. And now, we have a story for you, and we promise you, it's true.
Bad Doors by John Wiswell, narrated by Trendane Sparks. The country was at just over 10,000 deaths the morning that the door appeared. On Cosmo's phone, NPR was interviewing a doctor with a nasal voice about the need for social distancing, while Cosmo himself collected empty cans from around his home office. They were everywhere. Walls of recyclable cans dominated his room. Just beside his bookshelf, out of the view from where he taught his Zoom classes, he'd constructed a veritable castle of empty Coke Zeros. If you spread your arms wide, that is roughly the distance you want to be away from others, the doctor explained. That prevents your breath and expectorant from coming into contact with others. Cosmo tried spreading his arms that wide. He'd always been gangly, and promptly knocked over a 3-stack of cans balanced on top of his riverside Chaucer. The cans clattered to the ground and rolled into the hall. Cosmo chased them, hunched over, like a cartoon dinosaur in pursuit. Nearing the hall, he called out for his cousin. "Jesse, got any empty seltzers? I'm doing a recycling run." That's when he saw the new door. It was equidistant on the wall between the entrances to his room and Jesse's. Its deep burgundy color stood out against the plaster white of the walls. It was perfectly flat, without any veins or grain, like it was liquid that had merely cooled to look like wood. It had a square knob made of polished ebony that shone against the redness. On Cosmo's phone, the interviewer asked, "What about the people who say they can't breathe with masks on?" Cosmo covered his mouth and breathed through his fingers. All the doors in his house were cheap particle wood. There was no door on that wall of his hallway. There was no room behind there. He didn't remember getting high this morning. He got closer, expecting this hallucination of a burgundy door to fade. He heard Jesse's dog Rufus approaching, little toenails pattering on the hardwood. The Labrador Hound mix had the coldest nose Cosmo had ever encountered, and no sense of smell to go with it. Yet Rufus still nosed at the burgundy door like it would give him a treat. Cosmo took a moment to make sure that the door wasn't something Jessie had picked up at the Home Depot or something and left leaning against the wall. No, it was embedded in the wall. Despite this being an internal wall, he heard sounds like rasping wind and a heavy humming coming from the other side. Rufus nosed closer at the door, pushing his muzzle at something on the floor. It was thin and flaky, like a bit of snakeskin. The dog opened his mouth as though to eat the snakeskin, and that was it for Cosmo. He scooped the pup up in a two-armed hug and ran for the back door. He didn't even put his shoes on. Hell no, he was not finding out what this was about. Uncle Doll gave Cosmo no end of shit for moving, but Uncle Doll also kept sending his conspiracy theories about Bill Gates, so Cosmo mostly ignored him. Their family was a piece of work. They begged for hand sanitizer and then barely used it. Jessie complained about the move, too, even though his ass had never paid Cosmo rent. Sheltering for the pandemic seemed to be Jessie's means of living for free. As it was, Cosmo walked Jessie's dog more than Jessie did. Fortunately, Rufus was good company. Cosmo only returned to the house twice to get some of his stuff for the move. He put that house right on the market. He wasn't living in whatever was about to happen there. Jessie asked, "What was going to happen there?" To which Cosmo answered, "I don't want to know." The weirdest thing was that the second time he went back, when he went with the realtor, the burgundy door wasn't there. Just a little sloughed-off snakeskin blowing along the floor. The realtor, Mrs. Weiss, said, "Good move getting rid of that door. It threw off the vibe of the hallway. You drywalled so cleanly I couldn't even tell there had been a door there." Cosmo hadn't touched anything. He was about as handy as a man with 4 feet. But he also wasn't sticking around to investigate. Complaining about disappearing mystery doors was only going to cost him resale value. He needed all the money he could get, because while selling in this market was good, finding a new place was brutal, with all the people sheltering in place from the pandemic and all the boomers buying new places to shelter. Mrs. Weiss said it'd be easier if he waited 6 months for COVID to blow over. Cosmo wasn't waiting around. He ate his losses and got Jessie and Rufus into the moving van and moved the hell across the state. His part of this story was over. Or it was supposed to be. The door had other plans. They lugged their crap in through the unthreatening taupe doors of their new home. It was half the size of the old place, a single-story building that could have been a double-wide trailer in a previous life. It was what Cosmo could get for his money. Most of their stuff wouldn't fit. One thing he refused to lose was the plush beige sofa that was more comfortable than whatever clouds God sat on. Cosmo and Jessie wrestled with it for 15 minutes, with Rufus running in circles between their legs before they got it through the house's narrow entrance. It was such a tight fit that they dropped it halfway down the front hall. They sat on their prize with their feet up against the wall. Rufus bounded over an armrest to snuggle and jam his cold nose into Cosmo's armpit. Cosmo and Jessie took hits off the weed in Jessie's vape pen. After his second inhale, Jessie asked, "You feel like getting the TV?" Cosmo had just gotten comfortable, too. He said, "If you want it, you go get it. I need my shows. Don't you have a phone? And where would you even put a TV in here?" Jessie swiped vaguely down to the other end of the off-white hall. The lighting was strong there, shining on a burgundy door. Cosmo jumped over the dog and sofa alike. He sheltered behind an armrest, staring at that door. It had that same square doorknob of polished ebony. Cosmo said, "That shit was not there a minute ago, right?" Jesse hit the vape pen again and leaned toward the door. No, it was not. Is that the same door from the old house? Don't look at it like that. Like what? Jesse reached for his cousin. He grabbed at his hoodie. Like you're going to touch it. No yank on Jesse could get the man to budge. He said, You don't know it's dangerous. Jesse, are we on all the drugs? Unfortunately, we are not. Then that door is stalking us. No good comes from that. Jesse had the gall to frown at him when there was an evil door standing right down the hall from him. He said, What is your trauma, man? What happened to you to make you afraid of a little mystery? What was his trauma? Cosmo had a perfectly regular amount of traumas. He shook his head at his cousin. No, man, this isn't on me. I don't know what's wrong with people like you who want to touch an impossible thing that's messing with you. Doors don't appear from nowhere. Well, this one did. Cosmo smacked the armrest for emphasis. Exactly. And what happens next? Do space witches come through the door? Does other shit materialize around my house and in 10 minutes we fall into a basement that never existed? I'm not finding out. I'm not doing the science here. Not one sentence made Jesse turn around. He kept staring at the door. But what's inside? I just said I don't want to know. Cosmo gathered Rufus into his arms. Let's go. Jesse didn't go. He crawled over the sofa and wandered across the floor into Cosmo's unwanted house. No expletive slowed him down. He reached a hairy hand for that square doorknob. Cosmo took off, abandoning his sofa and his cousin, and went straight through the nearest exit. The taupe door hit him in the hip on the way out, and Rufus barked in his arms. The dog got loud enough that Cosmo couldn't hear whether Jesse actually opened that forbidden door. On the cracked concrete of the front step, Cosmo hesitated a second. Jesse, get out here! That used up the last of his bravery. In the next moment, he was in the moving truck, starting it up with the front door still ajar. Rufus wagged his tail and tried to climb across his lap like this was an adventure. The truck farted to life and rumbled. The seatbelt chime pestered him. He checked over his shoulder and saw the driveway was clear and he could back out. He kept it idling, waiting, willing his cousin to find sense and get out of there. Even if Jesse came with Pennywise and the Babadook chasing him, it would be a relief to get them all out alive. The truck idled so long that the fastened seatbelt chime gave up. Cosmo lingered, watching the house for anything. Any mellow the weed had given him was dead. Damn it, he said to himself. As he stepped out, he made sure to close Rufus in the truck so the dog would stay out of trouble. Rufus wagged his tail cluelessly. When Cosmo checked inside, the burgundy door was closed. The black knob shone brightly with its polish. He called, Jesse? No answer. He checked the bathrooms, the rear lawn. There was no sign of his cousin anywhere. The air barely smelled like his weed. It smelled more like wilting produce in here. Being alone in the house with that door was too much. Cosmo started to leave and then spotted some garbage in front of the door. He thought it was a bunch of torn packing paper until he noticed the scaly pattern. It was a long hunk of snakeskin, maybe 5 feet of it. It was all dried and curled there at the foot of the door, exactly where Jesse had stood. Cosmo spent the police investigation in cheap motels, simultaneously dreading and knowing no answer would come. He never stayed more than a couple of days at the same place. He picked ones with small rooms where he could see most of the walls. No doors were sneaking up on him. The pickings were thinner since some motels forbade dogs. He couldn't bring himself to give Rufus to a shelter. It seemed every day there was another news break of COVID breaking out in another community or animal shelter. The poor dog had been through enough. So Cosmo spent his nights with the weirdo dog's nose tucked into his armpit. Jessie had said that Rufus had lost his sense of smell in a car accident. Who knew what he liked about Cosmo's armpit? Maybe it had the right warmth and moisture balance? He tried not to think about it. These days, he was bad at not thinking about things. Cosmo was on the windowsill, on the phone with his Uncle Doll. Rufus padded over and flopped against Cosmo's ankle. He gave a classic dog sigh. It sounded exhausted, but probably didn't mean anything. Projecting human emotions onto a dog's sigh was almost as irrational as projecting them onto a door. Uncle Doll coughed so loud it sounded performative. He said, "Your mother raised you to be smarter with money. You sold 2 houses for chicken feed. You've got to invest." Cosmo said, "Did you miss the part with the evil door?" "Again with your evil door story." "It ate my cousin. Jessie, Aunt Angela's son, disappeared." "My house is full of doors. Should I be scared and sell too?" Cosmo closed his eyes. This was not why he had called his uncle. In as neutral a tone as he could force, Cosmo asked, "So you don't remember any weird doors appearing to you or Mom or Aunt Angela? Not when you were little? Never heard anything like on the Russian side of the family either?" "My grandfather would have beaten the flesh off your knuckles for suggesting that. We're Orthodox. We never mess with the occult." Cosmo could have argued that there had been plenty of occultism in Russia, but that wasn't the point of the call. He asked, "The occult never messed with us? There's nothing about snakes or square doorknobs or anything?" "You pampered children." Instantly, his uncle's voice switched to condescensions. He went from irate condescension to an insincere condescension, like this was entertaining for him now. "First you kids said there was this super virus sweeping the planet. Now you say there are evil doors everywhere. This is what's wrong with your generation. You scare easily." As though done with this conversation, Rufus got up and padded away from the window. Cosmo said, "COVID is real, Uncle Doll. Are you using the hand sanitizer?" "Look, I'm on a Facebook group with real doctors. They are suppressing the research." Cosmo pinched the bridge of his nose. "Who is?" "Corporate media. They're trying to scare you into being a sheep. None of those people are really dead. It's all a plot to steal the election. Did you see what the governor said?" No, Cosmo was not having this same argument again. He'd gotten it in a dozen Facebook posts every day. Actual colleagues had unfriended Cosmo for being connected to Uncle Doll. He hated thinking that he'd have to sever ties with one of the last people who remembered how his mother's voice had sounded. Cosmo powered through with one last-ditch effort. "So you're absolutely sure there's nothing about doors or snakeskin or anything in the family?" Uncle Doll barked out a laugh so hard Cosmo could almost smell his halitosis through the phone. "What do you even think is behind your scary door? This thing you're throwing your life away over." Rufus whined from over near the coat closet. He was nosing at the wall, where the one lamp in the motel room barely illuminated anything. There wasn't much to look at, yet the dog with no sense of smell moved like it was sniffing. Another look, and Cosmo saw the burgundy door. It was the same imposing height as it had been in his house, and in the second house where he'd lost Jessie. It was set right into the wall beside the closet, like it was inviting him to grab its square knob and walk through into the next motel room. Rufus turned his dappled head to look at Cosmo, furry ears drooping. He had a long strand of snakeskin dangling from his mouth. Uncle, I'll call you back. He got his first vaccination shot in an open-air clinic on a college campus, about an hour's trip from where he'd picked up the RV. The nurse told him to move his arm every hour or so it wouldn't get sore, and fortunately, Rufus was hyper that day and kept tugging on the leash to go explore more bushes. Cosmo kept Rufus near him at all times these days, in case of doors. Together, they went on a walk to a local car dealership. Something about the supply chain and microchip shortage meant the car market was a disaster. He settled for a decade-old used RV with a recently replaced engine. It was dingier in person than it had looked online. Still, as he ran his hand over its unusually low roof, Cosmo grinned. He used a tape measure on the tan and brown body of the RV to make sure. It was on the small side, with barely enough space for himself and Rufus to cook and sleep and play video games and Zoom. Better, it was the wrong dimensions for other things. It was too short, too narrow, and had windows in too many places. The door had always showed up the same size. There was no way it could fit on this RV. "Who's a clever boy?" he asked Rufus, rubbing the dog's floppy ears. "Who's smarter than a door?" If face-licking was a sign of approval, then Rufus thought he was a genius. His phone buzzed as he pulled out of the lot. It was Uncle Doll. He'd been texting more since Cosmo had deleted Facebook. He couldn't deal with all the conspiracy theories and the deluge of textual screaming in his life. The last post he'd seen had speculated that governments were hiding COVID deaths as pneumonia deaths. He ignored Uncle Doll for now and headed to the nearest campsite. Rufus and he had a whole road trip planned to explore parts of America without walls. Soon he'd be spending 2 weeks in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. 2 weeks alone after so many months basically alone. Some friends had invited him to a bonfire they claimed would be open air, about a day's drive out of his way. Considering it made him ache, but the longer he was away from them, the less he trusted that they were really isolating and social distancing, and the more he read into their unmasked selfies. The campgrounds were on some hills overlooking a small pine forest and a public sports field. A bunch of kids in mismatched uniforms were playing soccer, and parents pumped their fists and spilled their drinks in celebration from the faded bleachers. None of them wore masks, not the parents and not the players. Being that recklessly happy looked so appealing. Cosmo imagined taking Rufus down there and introducing him. Kids always wanted to pet him. A shriek rang out from near the southern goal. A kid had tripped and went down, clutching his leg. Everyone swarmed him like ants. First his fellow kids, and then parents. From all the way up at his campsite, Cosmo could tell the kid had just skinned his knee. It must have been so comforting to that boy to have all those people around him, caring for a little pain. Nobody masked up as they came closer. Cosmo's instinct to go join the sympathy faded into a concern that any one of them could have infected the whole huddle. How terrible would it be if that instant of caring for a crying child was like a spreader event? What were they all even thinking, gathering like this? Did the U.S. have to hit 1 million deaths to scare people into taking it seriously? His phone buzzed and interrupted his ire. It startled him so hard he nearly dropped Rufus's leash. He'd really lost himself there. He checked his phone. It was another text from Uncle Doll. Cosmo skimmed the messages, half watching the kids below celebrate their fellow athlete walking it off. When Cosmo scrolled to the last message, his fingers clenched down on the phone. He pulled the screen closer to his face. Uncle Doll had seen the door. "Where is it?" Cosmo asked before he even got out of the RV's cab. Rufus tried to follow, and Cosmo barely shut the door in time to keep him in. He wasn't letting Rufus get hurt. Uncle Doll rubbed a sneakered foot at a crack on the driveway. His scraggly gray beard was entirely unmasked. Brown sweatpants dangled on his skinny legs, and his beer gut was mostly contained in a red bathrobe. For how lazily he was dressed, his thinning gray hair was gelled and neatly combed over his freckled scalp. His uncle said, "You're really living in that thing? That's not a home." He coughed twice, then spit something yellow onto the pavement of the driveway. Cosmo stepped away from him and got a dirty look for it. Cosmo asked, "Did you get vaccinated? I can help you sign up." "I'm not a sheep. I don't need the deep state tracking my every move." Cosmo pointed to the rectangular bulge in Uncle Doll's bathrobe pocket. "There are not microchips in vaccines, and you have a cell phone. I guarantee you, TikTok already has all your information." "You live in a glorified car. You're going to talk to me like that? Take your life back. Be a man." "It turns out the RV doesn't care what gender I am. Neither does this door curse thing." Cosmo kept talking just to move the conversation along. This had already reminded him why he deleted Facebook in the first place. "Where's the door? How long has it been here?" Uncle Doll pointed out back to the yard he paid landscapers to mow and seed for him. The rear wall of his house was brick, painted the same deep blue of the U.S. flag, paint flaked in various places, and at first Cosmo mistook some of the flecks for snakeskin. But standing on the watered lawn, looking at those blue-painted bricks, he didn't see the door anywhere. He looked closer, wondering if Uncle Doll had painted over it. Uncle Doll did lots of weird things. Cosmo asked, "You said it was out here?" Uncle Doll said, "You don't visit family anymore. You didn't even come for the holidays. You won't come in our houses because of this COVID thing. Do you see anyone other than that dog?" Cosmo was looking around the next side of the house before he understood what that meant. He wheeled at Uncle Doll. "Is it actually here?" Uncle Doll coughed again, a brackish noise. "You're so afraid of this phantom door. Doors are everywhere. Doors are just a thing. This thing ate Jessie. How do you not care about that?" "I don't believe that story," Uncle Doll said, coming closer, which made Cosmo back away. "But if any of it's real, we could make money. That's why we needed to see each other. It'll show up if you stay long enough. You said it appears everywhere. Let's do something with this opportunity." Cosmo noticed the surveillance cameras mounted around his uncle's property. At least 2 of those were aimed at them. Was he recording this? Was he looking to make a profit off a video of Cosmo getting bewitched by a burgundy door? He tried to slow his breathing. He was not slugging a senior citizen today. He put a fist to the side of his own head and pushed, making himself turn away so he wouldn't yell. But maybe he should yell. Maybe embarrassing his uncle in front of his neighbors would rattle some sense into him. Uncle Doll said, "Don't be dramatic. It's time for you to move on. Look at that wall. Show me this door. Then you can leave it here. Give the door to me." Despite himself, Cosmo did stare at the wall, and that dark blue paint that belonged in depictions of a U.S. flag. The seams between every brick under the paint were so obvious. He wondered if the door would appear burgundy as always, or if its shape would emerge from beneath the blue. He'd never seen where the door came from. His uncle deserved it. If he wanted to get swallowed into the unknown like Jessie, then a hurt part of himself said to let it happen. The instant he encountered that thought, more followed through it. If he was going to let the door appear, he could do something nice for himself after. Maybe he'd stick around to see it open and have all those nagging questions answered from a safe distance. Maybe he could drive to the bonfire with his friends after all. Go teach on campus again. Fill up an entire fine arts building with evildoers because screw it. If nobody else cared, then why should he? Uncle Doll sniffed wetly and rubbed his nose. No more excuses. It's time for you to live a real life. That was why he shouldn't. Spite was a bad reason. But people had been taking this unseriously since the first day he'd carried Rufus away from the first door. The door was stalking him, and he didn't change. Jessie was gone, and he didn't change from that insipid condescension. Cosmo pushed away from the wall with its flecking paint and its bricks and its promises of bonfires. No door had appeared yet, and no door was going to appear. He marched in a wide berth around his uncle, not wanting to breathe an iota of that man's air. Rufus was halfway up on the dashboard, head up, panting happily at the sight of him through the windshield. That dog was so happy just at the idea that Cosmo was coming home. Before he'd even fully sat at the wheel, Rufus's cold nose went directly into his armpit. He hugged the dog around his neck. Uncle Doll followed him, yelling, "You've got to take control!" He looked at his uncle one more time. I am. Me leaving is me taking control. Don't text me again. He slammed the door and pulled the RV out of the driveway, not looking back, not caring if the whole property was overtaken by weird doors and an old man's outrage. He and Rufus rode straight for the interstate to get out of Florida as early as he could. The two of them had a date with the Great Smoky Mountains. His uncle texted him several more times. Cosmo didn't let himself read them. He couldn't stand the sting. Texts slowed over the weeks and stopped a month later when Uncle Doll passed away. Officially, it was pneumonia.
Well done. You survived another story. What did you think of Bad Doors by John Wiswell? If you're a Patreon subscriber, we encourage you to head over to our Discord channel and tell us. When I was reading the beginning of this story, I was amazed. A horror protagonist acting sensibly? In this economy? Not trying to find a reasonable explanation or thinking it's a hallucination or trying to see what's behind the door. Just sees the weird door and gets out immediately. Common sense. Of course, this is horror, and it's never that simple. What I found interesting about this story is how it shows various people reacting to fear. The acute stress response, or more commonly known, the fight, flight, or freeze response. Let's start with the freeze response. This is what we see with the soccer game. They are not frozen in place, but in time. The time before COVID. Just live your life and act like nothing's wrong, and nothing bad will happen. The problem with that strategy is that bad things often don't care what you believe. Facts, COVID, and dangerous doors don't care about your feelings. Then there's the flight response, and that's Cosmo. As soon as the door shows up, he runs. Not an unreasonable reaction. However, the problem is, what do you do if your pursuer doesn't tire? You keep running and running, finding smaller and smaller places to hide. But at some point, there are no places to run to and no places to hide. You stripped away everything you can to make yourself faster and smaller, but what's left? Cosmo gets near that point, but loving something else, his dog, keeps him from destroying his life in order to save it. Finally, there is fight, and that is Uncle Doll. Oh, he's a fighter, mostly through his phone. His enemy? Reality. Reality isn't fitting with his preconceived notions, and of course, he isn't wrong, so it must be reality. He's that relative, convinced it's all a hoax by Big Pharma and the Deep State, and I don't think he specifically mentions the Jews, but I'm sure it's in there somewhere. They are likely to attack family members for being beta and cuck and soy for believing in vaccines. So familiar. When presented with a door, he wants to conquer and exploit it. So familiar. This reminds us that it's not just the monsters who are important to the horror story. It's how we react to said monsters. On to the subject of subscribing and support. We are a non-profit, part of the Escape Artists Foundation, which has been a leader in our industry for 20 years, pioneering some mission-based short speculative fiction podcasting. PseudoPod itself is 20 years old this year, and we've got some fun things coming up for that. Watch this space. Most of you already support our Patreon, and Escape Artists has always relied on the generous support of our audience members to bring free, accessible, speculative audio fiction to millions of people worldwide. To make sure we keep coming back and continue paying our authors, narrator, and crew, you may have noticed we've introduced brief, paid advertisements at the beginning and the end of episodes for all Escape Artist podcasts, including PseudoPod. But, good news. Patreon subscribers get ad-free versions. So if you can, go to pseudopod.org and sign up. The $7 level will get you ad-free access, as well, of course, as access to our Discord channel, where you can come and chat with us. Not only that, you'll be able to download stories all the way back to day one in your podcatcher to listen to at your leisure. Although one-off donations really help, and we're incredibly grateful for every morsel, regular donations make all the difference to us. It gives us stability, sustainability, and allows us to hire large animal veterinarians to treat our tentacled menagerie. They get very whiny when they're sick. If you can't afford to support us financially, and trust me, we do understand, do please consider leaving reviews for our episodes, or generally talking about them on social media. Personal recommendations are extremely valuable. We particularly love to see you on Blue Sky. Find us at pseudopod.org. You can also support us by buying things from the Escape Artist Void merch store. The link is in various places, including our latest social media posts. PseudoPod is part of Escape Artists Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit, and this episode is distributed under the Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, Non-Derivatives 4.0 International License. Download and listen to the episode on any device you like, but don't change it or sell it. Theme music is by permission of Anger's Manga. And finally, PseudoPod and the Bene Gesserit know, I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me. And when it is gone past, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. Where the fear has gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain. See you soon, folks. Take care, stay safe, and keep up with your vaccinations.
When you listen to a narrator or let yourself go into a story, you are letting yourself go into the car of a stranger. You are getting into the car of a stranger. You are walking in the front door of someone you do not know.
It's a pseudopod. It's a big foot.
It's all about podcasts these days.